So I wanted to talk about a cultural shift that it seems to me that has happened in the last 6 or 7 years or something like that. So maybe since the beginning of the 2000s, there's been a movement where people's attention has become more and more scattered. And it seems to me that the culmination of this scatterbraining process where was, I guess, the rise of Twitter might have been one of the main symptoms. And if you look at the most seen videos on YouTube at different times, right? About 6 years ago, I think that the peak video created was Gangnam Style. And Gangnam Style is, to me, the limit of this atomization of psychological processes, right? Because Gangnam Style doesn't really have a topic that anyone who watches it can understand. It is maximally designed to be just the atomized parts of our consciousness doing whatever gathering of dopamine they can do at like a minimal level. So it's basically the minimum level of resolution of how to gather attention from a human, right? There's like an attractive redhead, Korean neotenic looking girl, yellow suit wearing dude, an elevator that surprises you by opening with a guy under another guy who's dancing in a weird way, and so on. It's basically a combination of features that are all atomized to the minimum level of clickbaitness experience. So it's basically like luring your cognition to pay attention to all those things at the same time in a long sequence, which seems to me to be the culmination of a bigger cultural process, which is the cultural process of diminishing attention spans and luring people through these like quick dopamine hits that the previous version of Twitter with 140 characters used to do. And basically this entrapment into the minimum level of attention necessary to perceive something that evolution has made us interested in for whatever reason, right? So it's the ultimate extrapolation of the attend and orient evolutionary control mechanisms, and in both Twitter and Gangnam Style, it seems to me that those things reach the point of diminishing returns of sorts. So we basically overutilize the limbic system, and this social procedure went through its full course, and there's basically no further level to which atomization can be easily made. I mean, maybe fast flashing pornography might have a little bit of those features, but that might be too fringe for a lot of the population. I suppose that pornography consumption might also have peaked at about the same time, which is 2012, by the way. And since then, I think there's been a series of processes that happen in psychology in general, which change substantially what types of things there's a substantial part of the population attracted to, right? So it seems to me that people were desensitized to these atomized immediate experiences to some extent. So if you see what the most viewed video on YouTube is now, speaking in July 2018, that is Despacito, which is a song about a slow procedural course where you have to like slowly seduce a person. It talks about traveling, it talks about labyrinth, it talks about doing things in a slow fashion manner. It has many references to Christianity and that kind of thing. And it seems to me that the main distinction between Gangnam Style and Despacito, if you consider the lyrics of Despacito and not the lyrics of Gangnam Style, because who speaks Korean anyway? is, in fact, like it being in Korean is part of the attention grabbing mechanisms that make Gangnam Style important, right? But anyway, if we think about these two songs as manifestations of the collective unconscious of a particular era, then Despacito seems to me to be the beginning of the enlargement of our attention span collectively as a species. Once we have become desensitized to these attention-grabbing mechanisms that started in the early 2000s and culminated with Twitter and Gangnam Style. The converse, the non-musical aspect of society, which I think is increasing on the internet, that manifests the same increased length of attention once we've been desensitized again, is the rise of long form discussions. So pretty much everyone with a camera nowadays, like I'm doing now, I suppose, can just podcast whichever ideas they feel like the public could be interested in to everyone. And there's been a rise in importance in discussions that are maybe 40 minutes to 3 hour length, with the strongest manifestations of that being the intellectual dark web people. So Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, the Rubin Report, and Joe Rogan, I suppose, are, I guess, Ben Shapiro. I guess those are rising form attempts to not only capture the immediate structures of our limbic system, of our immediate reward sensors, but attempts that are rising in importance to capture the long form narratives for which we have been designed, right? And if you actually read the Despacito lyrics, it does have a lot of conceptual structures that are archetypal in Jordan Peterson's sense. It does have references to Christianity and so on. Of course, it's a very sexualized song. It has simple beats, and it has all the other features that are necessary to capture the minds of the masses of humans in a way that is convergent throughout, independently of where you're from and where you are. But it does have a lot of elements that are about slowness. And I mean the song itself, the name of the song is, slowly, which I think is a psychological need that has risen in society as a whole. And in particular, it has risen within the domain of relationships and of dating. And I think this is related to a few things. Up until yesterday, I was thinking about this mostly as a consequence of feminism. So with the rise of the third wave feminism, it seems to me that the nature of dating changed so much that people just have a longing for the manners in which courtship used to happen back in, I don't know, maybe 70, 50 years ago, something like that. And there was a desire, there's this inchoate longing for a slow process of dating. But yesterday I thought a little bit deeper about that, and it seems to be more related to the dating apocalypse. And if you don't know what the dating apocalypse is, there's this great video by an app called Hinge. It's a cartoon animated video, 2 minutes long. You should check it out. And the dating apocalypse has deactivated all the long-term mating circuits of a substantial fraction of people, and it has allowed the fact that, as Peterson says, women like to mate across and over mating hierarchies, and I guess most people in evolutionary psychology would say that it's mostly up, like it's seldom actually across a mating hierarchy. So if you rank all the males and all the females usually aim upward and would prefer to take longer and take rounds with other females to seize a male that is higher in the hierarchy than to actually pattern match with someone who's in the same rank as they are. And if you ally that feature of the female nervous system, let's say, or of the female evolutionary structure of desire acquisition, right? If you ally that feature with the dating apocalypse, that is the rise of Tinder, the minimalization of the process of courtship to, you know, swipe right, swipe left, send 2.5 messages to someone, and bang, you're a stud, as Simon Sinek would say. What you get from that is this interesting phenomenon where we've taken the structure of the female brain and given it what it thinks it wants, in a way. And in that process, this ended up destroying the narrative structure of courtship, right? Courtship used to be, in a sense, a journey, right? You have a goal, you aim for your goal, as Despacito describes, and you slowly progress into getting there. You might go through a labyrinth, you might do things slowly, and eventually you get to rise sufficiently much in the attention-grabbing mechanisms of that person that you become their prescribed and desired mate. And of course, that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, it still does happen, but it's a substantially smaller fraction of the population. And to the extent that a larger and larger fraction of the population is thumb dating, what we see is the same inchoate longing that has manifested in music, with the differences between Gangnam Style and Despacito happening, and with the rise of these long-form discussions. And in particular, Jordan Peterson talks a lot about narrative, archetype, the value of the biblical narratives, the Bible being a very long book that has survived evolutionarily across centuries and so on. So the same inchoate longing, it seems to me, was generated by the rise of Tinder, the rise of OkCupid, and the other manifestations of the dating apocalypse. And now, as a society, there's a great insatisfaction with the fact that everything is so easy. There's a substantial lack of a felt sense that things are meaningful, in part because everything has become co-located, right? So everything is at one click distance from us. You click something on Amazon, you get an immediate reward. The next day it's in your doorstep. You want to learn something, 2 clicks away from it on YouTube. You want to bang someone, you're 3 clicks away from them on Tinder. You want to basically any kind of reward acquisition mechanism is immediately visible, right? You want to talk to someone, you want to interact with someone, you want to make your presence known. You can interface with people in video form very quickly. You can call someone anywhere in the world. Even if you travel, you're still at home in a way, because you're always in this ethereal space of computers, which can just connect you to anywhere in the world. So in the process of making distances smaller and smaller technologically, we ended up killing the concept of journey, and we have such a strong inchoate longing for going through a journey, going through a hero narrative, that, you know, this time spent between 2012 and now also predicts the rise of all the Marvel movies of hero narratives. I mean, hero stories are basically an incredibly substantial cultural phenomenon now, and I think that basically traces, you know, like Cain and Abel in the Bible, which Jordan Peterson is discussing in his long-form discussions, is very similar to the brother duality, enemy duality that is manifest in, say, Thor and Loki in the Marvel Universe. And you can find parallels in many other heroic narratives. So what I think connects these three threads is that society as a whole has had its attention mechanisms collapse to smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller fractions, up to the point where we get to the rise of Tinder and the rise of Gangnam Style. This is the peak of atomization, um, which you can also look up this concept, I think. Meaningness, which is a blog, has a very good post on atomization. And we got desensitized, and when we got desensitized, we were like, well, okay, so let's try to get those rewards in a slower manner. And now the rewarding thing is itself the long form, the narrative, the journey, the labyrinth, the going through larger levels of complexity, which is exemplified in Jordan Peterson being the most sold book in the world, long form discussions taking over non-long form discussions. An increasing rise in interest in the biblical narratives and other archetypal hero myths and mythologies that capture these substructures that evolved long ago in our evolutionary past. So I think we should watch out for one problem that this might generate, which is that these mechanisms, the mechanisms that evolved for attention grabbing, they were related to things like protecting yourself, right? If a tiger shows up, you have to protect yourself. So the things that were involved in the rise of Twitter and Gangnam Style, they're more related to protection, feeding, and just the immediate attending to like an attractive potential mate, right? So it's more basic substructures. Now that it seems that we're getting interested in these long-form narratives and these long-form debates and stories and religious myths, we might have a problem that as primates, we expect that the reward of a journey is going to be proportional to the magnitude of the journey, right? Like we are not designed to make an insufficiently unnecessarily long amount of effort in order to accrue a very small good. And at least originally, in primatology terms, the reason for these hero archetypes, the reason for going on a journey on a faraway land and slaying a dragon and getting a treasure and bringing back the treasure and revitalizing our culture, is that in the mating hierarchy, in the lobster hierarchy, however you want to call it, you would be rising, especially as a man, right? As an individual man, you would be rising in a way that would cause women to vie for your attention. And so the treasure, much like the Mario princess, once Mario kills that dragon, the treasure will usually be the attention and the sexual favors of a woman and romance and so on and so forth. But because of women's hypergamous nature and because of the rise of Tinder and the dating apocalypse, I don't think women are no longer going for those who have gone through a hero journey, because there's just too much availability of different people, and at any given time, the person who in the genetic hierarchy, which is different from the journey hierarchy, whoever happens to be the most attractive male might change, within days. There's someone who's the new Thor, the new most attractive male in a particular area where you can do your Tinder strikes, and with that, And with the capitalistic incentive for women to switch their mating strategies from long-term mating strategies to short-term mating strategies, because that's what favors the market, that's what makes everyone uh, be able to sell more products and so on. Uh, what ends up happening is you have the increasing creation of a large cohort of males who want to live through this hero narrative, who are willing to take responsibility, in Peterson's words, who will clean their rooms and go to a faraway land and slay a dragon and so on, and then they'll be expecting a princess at the end of the day. And it's unclear that there will be a princess on the other side, whereas all the princesses that are sticking around, they are being persuaded by the collective system, the state, feminism, but mostly Tinder and easy access to hypergamous mating, as long as it's a short-term mating. They're being convinced by those structures to more frequently go for attractive males, for males with positive genes, alpha males, whatever. And I think this is what's creating the sort of gender schism and societal level trouble that we can't really easily solve. We can't look at the way things are now and find a way to basically make these two different senses convert, right? Because on the one sense, you have this mating across and up, or from an evolutionary perspective, let's call it hypergamy, which is this desire that women have to seek whoever's the best possible mate. And then you have the capitalistic and the feminist and the state incentive, all of those, for women's shorter mating circuits to be the most salient ones. And you don't really have the space for the equivalent narrative structure for to be the person on the other side of the hero narrative being as enticing to women anymore, right? Like becoming a princess is no longer as valuable, right? They're devaluing princesses. Sleeping Beauty, right, who rises into consciousness once she finds a male, is no one's idealized woman. And you see this again and again, where the incentives are structured in such a way that all the males are basically like fighting for getting into a particular spot in their lives where they've lived a particular hero narrative and they've taken responsibility and they've risen the hierarchy. Now they're expecting the princess, and there's no princess on the other side, and actually the princess is saying like, why the hell do you think I owe you sex? She's probably right. She probably doesn't owe him much. And then if you say, well, let's go back to a world where the princesses are receptive to those who have taken the journey and have lived through the hero narrative, then you get shunned in the media for talking about enforced monogamy. So because you can't do that either, you have this interesting, and I think unique, maybe this might be a phenomenon of the last few years, like this basically unique separation of a few men from the rest of society, where they're just like, all right, if the game is such that you can't do this and you can't do that, then I'm gonna just chill and play video games, or I'm gonna try and solve this technologically and fabricate a doll that will give me love, and then I'll make it that'll give me sex, and then I'll make it a robot so that it can also give me love in the long course of events. You end up getting the phenomenon of Japanification, right? So Japanification being this total separation of the sexes, where the mating structures of the brain are no longer rewarded by actually meeting anyone and by actually interfacing. And this is happening to a great extent in Japan and has risen in the last while. But basically, women sometimes are buying male attention and cuddles and whatever it is that their mating circuitry demands that they have that they're not getting enough of, and men are buying, these virtual girlfriends and anime design shapes of women with exacerbated sexual parts and colorful hair and other super stimuli um, forms of whatever it is that males desire from a mating perspective. So I find all that to be interesting, but at the same time a little disturbing, right? Because I value the message that Peterson and the people who are bringing back Archetype and long narrative structures back to YouTube are creating. It's a great phenomenon to give so many people a shred of hope and the willingness to take your own life and take responsibility and take care of things. In fact, Peterson was extremely valuable to me. I must have watched maybe 200 hours of his content on YouTube. He's great. I was watching a video by him today, and but I do wonder what's going to happen when all these men who have chosen to voluntarily take responsibility and so on, but who also are fundamentally aware of some aspects of female nature, which, if you ally them with state-sponsored feminism and media control and the rise of Tinder, are no longer compatible with the assumed prize that comes at the end of that responsibility taking and living as a hero existence. Like it's not clear to me that those men will be satisfied with what they find on the other side, and I'm not sure what effect that's going to have on a society scale. So far, it seems to be okay. I mean, it seems to me that the genetically more attractive men are getting a fair fraction of the women. The genetically less attractive men are being persuaded to take responsibility. Those who are at least in the mid-range, who can vie for some attention if they get some power, some status, if they accrue some responsibility, if they slay a couple of dragons, are getting sufficient attention on the other side. But that's like a diminishing fraction over time. And there's a fair cohort that has just become ironic or sarcastic about the whole thing, and who are more I don't know, like laughing about the whole situation, the whole conundrum of the human experience. And an interesting thing is that there's also an increasing, even though absolutely tiny fraction, at the very bottom there, who are manifesting themselves in violent ways. And of course, that's undesirable, right? So you see the rise of the incels, the rise of people who are willing to rise from the dungeons of the robot sections of 4chan or from like autism forums or whatever, and go around killing a bunch of people. The most famous one, I think, is Elliot Rogers. There's been a guy in Canada who ran over people with a van. There's a lot of men who are killing their wives or their ex-wives and babies, and sometimes even their families. Once the corrupt courts in different places take away what they thought was rightfully theirs, such as the ability to see their children and that kind of thing. So there's been definitely an increase in a sort of a violent uprising of a very, very tiny minority of men who don't feel satisfied either with the fact that they no longer see themselves as having even a potential path to having access to love, attention, sex, and so on. So those are the black pills, and also the men who feel like they were betrayed by the system at a state or sociological level, right? So that might be men who lost guard of their children, who lost their money or any other thing. So there's this increasingly loud minority who seems very intolerant to that, And for the time being, I mean, the media is currently pushing the narrative that it's guns, but like that only works in the States, right? Because there's many other places. I mean, there was a guy in Brazil, I think, who killed like 8 people in that way. Nigerian man, I think, in Germany, decapitated a baby in the subway for the same kinds of reasons. So there's a there's a societal level problem. I mean, these are, of course, these are the rare examples. Like in total, these people haven't killed like 300 people or so, uh, maybe a little bit more, maybe in total 1,000. Um, but it's a new phenomenon, and I think all of that is related to what I was discussing previously, in that we want to go back to a world which has more elements of uh, hero narratives that allow for us to get to a princess on the other side. And the princesses who are on the other side no longer seem interested in that. And no one really knows what to do about that. So anyway, that's my cultural commentary of the day. I hope you enjoy this connection. And I think all of this is a recent phenomenon, right? So I'm tracing that to like the last 18 years, maybe. The rise of atomization up to 2011, 2012, and then the rise of the Zenkoid longing for longer form storytelling since. And that goes from Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter and other structures like that. Yeah, I don't think there's an easy solution. Like, what Peterson's doing is great. Um, what the incels and the other people who get revolted and become violent are doing is definitely not great. What the creators of robots and sex dolls are doing is great. It seems to me, right? It's a fantastic technological solution that helps attenuate male violence at the bottom of the lobster hierarchy. And I think anything that has those features should be considered very valuable and desirable. Um, but for the great middle, right, like the very bottom is gaining a lot of advantage to that. The very top has always done well for itself, at least in the male hierarchy. And what this big middle is going to do isn't clear to me. I mean, as I said, the top of the middle is just going to live through their hero myths and take responsibility and become better versions of themselves, and in doing so they will inevitably attract sufficiently much interest to satisfy the evolutionary substructures that cause them to mate select. But for the bottom half of the middle, there's nowhere to go. So yeah, I don't know where those people are going to go. So if you have a theory for what's going to happen to them, let me know. Do you think Japanification is likely to happen? Do you think they're going to basically separate the sexes and buy the aspects of courtship that each one desires in a mate separately? Say so in the comments. Subscribe, and I hope you enjoy this channel. And give me more ideas about what to talk about. I'm going to make usually shorter videos than this one. But this video gives a good sense of the kinds of things that I'm curious about and that I'm interested in, and the perspective and framework from which I think. So if you found this valuable, let me know in the comments below what do you think I should talk about in the next session. This is Diego Caleiro, and Thank you for your attention, and I hope you can slay your dragons. I sure am trying to slay mine.